Thank you to all of our sponsors, including the City of Covington, Kenton County Fiscal Court, ArtsWave, Kentucky Arts Council, Northern Kentucky Sports Hall of Fame, the Carol Ann and Ralph E. Hale Jr. Foundation, and our members. If you're not yet a member of the museum, please consider joining for access to discounts and exclusive programming. Learn more and join at bcmuseum.org. We would love to hear from our viewers tonight. So if you have a question or comment to share, please type it in the chat or Q&A feature, and I will be sure to get to those at the end of the presentation. So let's go ahead and meet tonight's presenter. Heather Churchman is a communications manager by day and an architecture-obsessed local historian by night. A passionate and curious spirit, she can often be found whispering sweet nothings to the remnants and historical treasures of greater Cincinnati. Born in Oxford, Ohio, educated at Ohio University, and now a proud resident of Covington, Kentucky, she is living proof that you can take the girl out of Ohio, but you can't take Ohio out of the girl. Follow Churchman's explorations of local history and all the weird and wonderful things she uncovers along the way at Covington Uncovered on Instagram. So thank you so much, Heather, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So before we get started, there is a quiz question tonight. So the first respondent to enter a correct answer in the chat on Zoom or Facebook Live will win a Northern Kentucky History Hour prize, and most importantly, bragging rights. Tonight's question is, Marian Spencer sued Coney Island in 1952 so her two boys could go swimming at Sunlite Pool. What year were Black children allowed to swim in the pool? So please go ahead and leave those answers in the chat. And then Heather, if you are ready, we can go ahead and get started. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you guys for having me. I'm very excited. Let me get my slideshow open here. Can everybody see my screen? Yep.
I'm seeing your speaker notes right now.
Oh, you can?
Mm-hmm.
Bear with me. Okay. Thanks everyone for your patience. I'm actually in Oxford, Ohio, where I grew up, and I'm on a bit of an unfamiliar computer. So thank you for your patience. How's that look?
Looks good.
Okay. So hi everyone, I'm Heather, and I'm the creator of Covington Uncovered, which is an architecture and local history focused account on Instagram. I take pictures of houses and buildings around town, and then I research the history of the house or location and find stories to share. Sometimes that's who built the house or a family that lived there. Sometimes it's a murder house, and people like those more than you would expect. I've written lots of stories about the Roebling Bridge and companies such as Stewart Iron Works. I also wrote several posts about Coney Island, which led to me doing this presentation. So get ready for a bumpy and interesting ride. So it all began with James Parker. He was an apple farmer. In 1867, James purchased 20 acres of land on the Ohio River, about 10 miles east of downtown Cincinnati. The land had 400 apple trees. So about 3 years later, a group rode their horses from the city and asked James if they could rent space in his orchard for a group picnic. Their plan was to charter a steamboat to bring guests there. Steamboats would become integral to the park's growth, and so would group picnics. After that, James thought, hey, maybe an orchard isn't such a great idea. How about I convert it to a rentable entertainment spot? So he reopened as Parker's Grove, adding a dining hall, dancing hall, and bowling alley, all of which you can see in this really neat sketch of the early days of the park. James also had a mule-powered merry-go-round, and when the apple trees started to die, he planted maple trees, some of which may still be down there, but I'm not quite sure. So as James grew his picnic rental business, he grew tired of all the headaches that came with it, especially the flooding at the riverfront location. More on that later. So in 1886, James sold his whole farm for $17,500, and he moved to Kansas, where I'm guessing he bought another farm, but I'm not sure. William and Malcolm McIntyre were both steamboat captains. They purchased James's farm. They had a steamboat. You can see the name here on one of these advertisements called the Guiding Star, and they needed a destination to take people to on the boat. So they were attracted to buy Coney Island because of that. So on June 21st, 1886, the newly renamed Ohio Grove, the Coney Island of the West, opened. The name Coney Island was chosen to evoke the iconic New York City park. Obviously, the new name was too cumbersome, so it was soon shortened to just Coney Island. And yeah, here are some of the ads the McIntyres used to draw people to the new park. It was, written about in all the papers. It was a pretty big deal. Most, if not all people, got to Coney Island via steamboat in the early days. This photo shows you how people got off the boat and into the park, which is pretty cool. The earliest park visitors definitely were not wearing athleisure. Here is the Dinkelman family at Coney Island in 1892. They look happy and maybe a little warm. And here's what the picnic grove looked like at that time, where they would come and enjoy a family picnic. In 1893, they turned a former cornfield into Lake Como, which was named after another famous locale, Lake Como in Italy. The land for the lake was purchased from John L. Whetstone in 1890. It cost just over $5,800 for about 16 acres of land. You could see here they had motorboats, lots of people. This kind of recalls Central Park to me as well. The lake was only built 3 to 4 feet deep across over an area of 12 acres. And as you can see, the swimming pool and play area was quite popular. Here is the lake as it looked in 1898. And then here is a later photo of the lake. You can see Sunlite Pool has already been constructed, so it's post 1925. But there was a train over Lake Como made by Chance Manufacturing, and they were named Mad Anthony Wayne and George Rogers Clark. Two names some of you might recognize. There's a George Rogers Clark Park in Covington, and I just know about Mad Anthony Street in Northside, so that could be related. These trains crossed over Lake Como on a 462 feet span, treating riders to a scenic journey with mechanical Indians and themed forts. So until 1947, like I said, passengers primarily got to Coney via steamboat. This image shows the park's marquee steamboat, the Island Queen. You could catch the boat from the foot of Vine Street and ride to Coney for 25 cents round trip. It was about 8.8 miles. And again, they look gorgeous. The first Island Queen was built in 1896 by the Cincinnati Marine Railway Company. The boat was designed and built specifically for Coney Island. It carried 4,000 passengers in its heyday, more than the capacity of Cincinnati Music Hall. Here is the Queen outside the original entrance to Coney. The Coney Island steamer Princess was built in 1900 in Marietta, Georgia. The Coney Island Company bought the steamer Princess in 1905 to be a sister ship for the Island Queen. The Princess did live a relatively short life. She was destroyed by ice in the 1917-1918 ice gorge disaster. Something I learned about while researching this presentation. How can a ship be destroyed by ice, you might wonder. Look at the city of Cincinnati steamer is half buried in ice right here. During that winter, the whole length of the Ohio River was frozen solid. And typically during every winter, the Island Queen and the Princess steamboats were tied up in Carrollton, Kentucky, which is about an hour downriver. So during the ice gorge, both ships got caught up in ice breakage. The Princess floated to Brooksburg, Indiana, where it finally disintegrated, they said. The Island Queen somehow survived that and landed safely in Madison, Indiana, which is another somewhat far away river location. This looks absolutely crazy to me, all this ice. The first Island Queen did last several more years until it was lost to fire on November 4th, 1922. Her sister ship, the Morning Star, was also lost in that fire. Coney would have many more steamboats, though, 19 total steamboats over its history. After Island Queen 1 sank, after it was lost to fire, the Island Queen 2 was built to be unsinkable and fireproof. She had an all-steel hull and mostly steel superstructure. The boat cost between $300,000 and $400,000. She went into service in 1925, which was a big year for Coney, and I'll be talking about that next. This picture shows the Island Queen 2 outside Coney's new lighthouse and stone gate entrance, which was built in 1925. The second Island Queen sailed for over 20 years, but sadly it was not fireproof in the end. It was lost to an explosion on September 9th, 1947. 19 crew members died that day, along with a piece of old Coney that would never be recaptured. Its steamboat heyday had passed. So let's move from the steamboats to the inside of the park. This is the first park entrance, circa 1912. Again, the fashion. In 1924, George and Ed Schott took over ownership of the park. They're responsible for building the second Island Queen, Sunlight Pool, and Moonlight Gardens. They owned the park for over 40 years. Here is a closer look at the Stone Gate entrance, which was built with stones from the banks of the Ohio River. This photo is from 2019, actually. So Moonlight Gardens opened in 1925. It was constructed by the Philadelphia Toboggan Company as an open-air dance hall, hence the name, Moonlight. It was originally called Moonlight Dansant or Moonlight Dance Gardens. The Toboggan Company added a partial roof to Moonlight in 1928 for about $1,200. Here is the bandstand and a glimpse of the dance floor, which had to be refurbished nearly every year due to flooding of the Ohio River. The venue held 4,000 people, making for some crowded nights, and there were a lot of reasons to visit Moonlight Gardens. Frank Sinatra and Benny Goodman played there. Louis Armstrong and his orchestra played Moonlight on July 7, 1939. At the time, Louis was, quote, the world's highest paid colored musician. However, Blacks could not go to his show at Coney Island that day. In 1947, Moonlight Gardens added the wrought iron gate to make it look more like New Orleans. This job cost about $100,000 and it was designed by Paul G. Hill. It's crazy to think that 1947 was also the first year they started stamping people's hands with fluorescent ink so people would not share tickets to Moonlight Garden. That definitely seems like a later invention. By the 1950s, Moonlight was regularly drawing crowds of over 4,000. In 1953, the biggest crowds were reported as Tex Beneke, 4,700 people, Tommy Dorsey, 4,400, Stan Kenton, 4,250, Guy Lombardo, 4,200, Clyde Trask, 4,100. That is a lot of people. So moving on to another edition in 1925, Sunlight Pool, which opened on May 22nd that year. The pool covers 2 acres and it is still, to this day, the largest recirculating pool in the world. That's 3,000 gallons of water. The pool was originally fed entirely by artesian wells that stretched down 100 feet into the ground. They help keep the pool at 77 degrees naturally. I love this picture because look at all those cars around Sunlight Pool. So we can't talk about Sunlight Pool without talking about Marian Spencer, who we already mentioned in the trivia question. She is the woman responsible for integrating Coney Island Park. Marian Regalia Alexander, later Spencer, was born in 1920 in Gallipolis, Ohio. She had a twin sister, Mildred, and 2 brothers, Harry and Vernon. Along with their parents, they lived in a home that was built by their formerly enslaved grandfather. And she was a later resident of Avondale. Marian and her husband, Donald Spencer, had 2 sons. In 1952, they wanted to go swimming at Sunlight Pool. The kids kept hearing a radio ad inviting all children in the city to Coney to meet a local TV personality. Marian said it seemed like the ad was on every 15 minutes during baseball games, which everyone listened to. So she called the park to check and was assured the invitation applied to all children. When she said, "We are Negroes," however, the invitation was rescinded. Marian did not want her boys growing up thinking that they were less than other children. So she worked with the Cincinnati NAACP to file a lawsuit against the park. She told her sons, this is the way we have to fight for our rights in today's world. For context, public pools in Cincinnati were officially desegregated on June 20th, 1950. That was due to the efforts of Theodore M. Berry, who, along with Marian Spencer, have streets named after them in downtown Cincinnati. I actually learned about where those names came from during this research. Ted's daughters, Gail and Faith, who are pictured here on a pony, were 2 of the first Black swimmers in a formerly whites-only pool called Owl's Nest in Walnut Hills. Gail said to her mom before being allowed to swim at Owl's Nest, "I just couldn't understand why we couldn't go swimming if it was hot." And her mother just said, "Because." So once the pool was desegregated that summer of 1950, there was some initial fuss, but by the end of the summer, all the kids were just having fun swimming together. It all worked out. So 2 years after that public pool integration, Marian and Donald Spencer, later deemed Cincinnati's first couple of civil rights, were fighting for their son to swim at Coney. Throughout the 1950s, Black people arrived at Coney Island only to be denied entrance. This was something that shocked tourists. They would have expected a northern city such as Cincinnati to be fully segregated already. There was actually a woman named Ethel Fletcher. She sued Coney Island after she traveled here and was turned away. She actually won her lawsuit, but it just got her into the park, not anyone else who was Black. These are photos of Marian and Donald on their wedding day and after. So for more than 65 years, Coney was inaccessible to Blacks. This not only went past Cincinnati's public pool integration, but also passed when the Supreme Court ordered the desegregation of public schools in 1954. In 1955, the city of Cincinnati put its foot down. Coney needed its permit renewed, and the city refused to grant it unless they integrated the park. So Coney opened its gates to Blacks in 1955, but not the pool and not Moonlight Gardens. On April 30th, 1955, 14 Black people entered the park for the first time, likely under a great amount of fear. Coney did not desegregate fully until its 75th year in business. That was the summer of 1961. But Coney closed in 1971 to make way for Kings Island. So they opened the park to all, but closed it within a decade. It was also really hard for Blacks to get to the park because it's not exactly a walkable route from the city. So, I just imagine how Marian Spencer must have felt after all of that, pretty disenchanted. Her sons had aged almost 10 years since they asked to go swimming at Sunlight Pool, and probably by then did not care much that they were allowed to. Thank you, Marian. So moving forward to a different topic that we already mentioned a little bit of, the park faced many challenges from the Ohio riverfront location, namely flooding, the Great Flood of 1937, which I believe is still the highest flood we've had in the area and led to a lot of flood walls and flood controls after that. But it covered Moonlight Gardens in 85 feet of floodwater. The whole park had to be almost entirely rebuilt. Some of the carousel horses were carried downriver as far as Paducah, Kentucky. That's hundreds of miles, almost to the Tennessee-Kentucky state line. Someone had to get them and bring them back. In 1947, owner Edward Schott estimated that each ordinary flood cost the park about $50,000, which doesn't even seem like enough. So I do want to touch on some of the rides that Coney had over the years, although I don't have time to cover all of them. We had a Ferris wheel, of course. We had the Wildcat roller coaster, which opened in 1926, and pictured here, the Shooting Star opened in 1947. Look how happy they look. The park had a meticulous reputation at that time. They called it America's Finest Amusement Park. And I think this is likely what it looked like when Walt Disney visited Coney Island as he was planning to open Disneyland. And he heard that he had to see Coney Island in Cincinnati. The mall, which is the area that you see here in the middle, was one of Coney's largest draws. Here is the mall in the 1940s. As said in a later article, it was walked by more than 50 million people during the park's first 85 years, which is pretty crazy. There was a sky ride over the mall. Here is the mall as it looked in 1964, just before they tore down the Wildcat roller coaster here that you see at the end. They really did have some lovely architecture on the mall that I like to see from the past. Top of the mall here, fine food and cocktails. Here's a lovely beer with a, Swiss style, German styling. We had the popular Land of Oz. So now we'll start to talk about the later history of Coney. After the end of steamboats and the Wildcat, more changes were in store for Coney. In 1969, the park was purchased by Taft Broadcasting with the intention to move the park north away from the river. So this is actually the impetus for Kings Island, which opened in 1971. The mall had been such a big part of Coney that they actually replicated that in a section of in a section of Kings Island. So in 1974, the original wooden part of the gardens was demolished, leaving behind the open air and front portion. The wrought iron gate was put in storage at Kings Island. And as you can see from this ad, the rest of the park's items that weren't moved to Mason were auctioned off. They decided not to move or recreate Sunlite Pool at the new Kings Island, so it did stay open. Even in 1972, the first year Kings Island was open, Sunlite Pool had 100,000 visitors. So Coney decided they could stay open a little bit longer. They reopened the Picnic Grove in 1973. They officially reopened the park in 1976. They even brought more rides back in the 80s. They added new rides, like another Ferris wheel in 1990, the Python roller coaster in 1999, and Wipeout in 2014. In 1984, Riverbend Music Center opened on land given to them by Coney Island. Oh, I'm sorry. Riverbend Music Center was opened on land given to the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra by Coney Island. At the time, 1984, Riverbend was actually only one of 16 outdoor amphitheaters in the US. And as mentioned before, where the Wildcat sat there at the end of the mall, this is where Riverbend was constructed. It was where the Wildcats and Shooting Star roller coasters were. So you can imagine that also took up some of the mall. In 2007, PNC Pavilion was added to the landscape on the site of the former tennis courts. It's crazy to think that PNC's capacity is just over 4,100, which is the same amount that fit in Moonlight Gardens and on the Island Queen steamboat. They even reopened Moonlight Gardens in 1985 and tried to revive, going out and dancing, as was very popular in the 1920s. None of these resurgences were enough to give Coney another 100 years, though. The park was never really the same after Old Coney was gone. You all probably know that music and event management, aka Mimi, I think, and the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra purchased Coney in December 2023. Their plan is to build a new music venue that complements Riverbend and PNC Pavilion and draws larger names to Cincinnati. Coney will be demolished. It's not clear whether Sunlight Pool or Moonlight Gardens or the stone arch and other artifacts that may be there will be saved, but it is my sincere hope that they will somehow be incorporated into the new grounds. Maybe a large water feature, because Sunlite Pool is still the largest pool in the world, largest recirculating pool in the world. So stay tuned to find out, along with me, what will happen to, the remnants at the park and what the future venue will look like. So that is my presentation. I want to thank you all for coming and learning more about Coney. I do invite you to follow my page at Covington Uncovered on Instagram. I'm trying to get more on Facebook, but I do most of the work on Instagram. And I just really want to thank Behringer-Crawford for having me at NKY History Hour, and everyone for being interested.
Well, thank you so much, Heather. That was an excellent presentation. There were so many really great photos that you shared. Heather, do you have, want to go ahead and start? I know I've seen a lot of comments and see what kind of questions. I guess first, why don't we go over the trivia question?
Yeah, so just to repeat for everyone, the trivia question was that Marian Spencer had sued Coney Island in 1952 so that her two boys could go swimming in Sunlight Pool. And so it was asking what year were Black children eventually allowed to swim in the pool. The answer was 1961, which Brewster Rose eventually got. So congratulations, Brewster. You will be getting your prize in the mail.
Good job, Brewster. And Heather, do you want to discuss that at all? Like what made it take so long for that to happen in the pool, you think?
So yeah, that's a great question. The city really was dragging its feet, to talk about something that may be uncomfortable. There was, something about swimming with Black people that scared white people. And, that's why they allowed people to come into the park in 55, but for some reason they still weren't comfortable enough to allow, Black people to swim in the pool. I think it's just what was going on in the nation at the time. And there was, I mentioned how there was a tourist who was surprised that it wasn't fully integrated. But as you guys know, we're in the, most southern northern city, and we sit across from Kentucky. So I think that presents a lot of conflicting attitudes. And yeah, but you can see the city got on board with Marian later, because they've essentially forced the park to act. But yeah, it was just years of lawsuits and people, just not being willing to do it, which, considering the context, is pretty crazy to me.
And I just learned
that the public pools were already integrated.
Yes, and I just learned the other day that there is a statue of Marian down on the near the banks, correct?
Yes. Yep. Okay. I know, I could have done a whole life story of Marian. Because she did a lot of other things for Cincinnati and civil rights. She was the first Black vice mayor, and I believe the first Black city commissioner in Cincinnati.
Very cool. Okay, Heather, you want to get to the other questions we might have?
Yeah, mostly we just have people sharing stories, which we can get to in a few minutes. But we do have one question. And they said they would like to hear more about Walt Disney's visit to Coney Island. And we're wondering if you had any information about that.
Oh, gosh, I wish I did have more. I just know that was under Schott's ownership. Yeah, I wish I actually knew more about that, because if I could date the opening of Disneyland, I could probably date, more about his visit. I do know it was in the 1940s, I believe. But yeah, it would be great to see a picture of that, wouldn't it?
And
it's usually just an anecdote, in the stories about Coney Island.
Yeah. Someone was asking, noting that you mentioned that the pool is fed by an artisan well, and is wondering if that was still the case today.
So I read that it was still partially fed by the wells at this time. So that's something else that, I would love to know more about, like, as they start to deal with the pool or potentially dismantle it. I would want to know what's happening with those wells, because I think it went from fully sourced from those wells to partially by the end. That's what I read. So I think it was artificial at the end.
Yeah. And what was one of the coolest facts that you found out from your research about Coney?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I think I loved all the steam. I think I loved learning so much about the steamboats because I would love for that to come back today. If I could take a boat from Covington over to Coney Island or over to go see a concert. So I love imagining, that world 100 years ago where that was the most common mode of transportation. I also never knew how old it was, never knew how old that pool was. 1925 seems, it was almost 100 years ago. So it seems it was modern for its day. And then, the Louis Armstrong story I really liked. I like reading that there's all these names that most people would know that, were here performing in Cincinnati.
Yeah. Frederick Warren has been sharing a few stories about Marian throughout the presentation. That her and her twin sister lived a few blocks from the Harriet Beecher Stowe house with their aunt when they attended UC.
Yes.
And that she was the first African American member of the Cincinnati City Council, which he just noted she was elected in 1983, and he was her campaign manager.
Amazing.
How cool is that?
Or
That's
Brewster.
so cool.
Brewster said he was her campaign manager. They've both been sharing a lot of information.
Oh, and Brewster,
thank you so much. I can't wait to read these comments.
Yeah. So thank you for joining us tonight, guys. Let's see which of these comments. Someone asked if you meant the family of Marge Schott when you mentioned the Schott family.
Yes, so that is it's a relative. Marge Schott married into that family. They were a big name in car dealerships, even, back in the day. So yeah, she married into that family. She wasn't directly related to the park owners, but yes, that was a big Cincinnati family that she married into.
And we have another question, wondering if it was common for people to sue Coney from back in the day, from all of the fights for civil rights.
Common for people to sue Coney?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was. That's one of the other interesting things was just learning that a woman who traveled here and got denied entrance twice decided to sue them. So, I'd love to learn more about that too, like what their legal team was, what was going on their side of it as far as why they were fighting against integration so much.
I thought it was so interesting that you said that she sued and that only she was allowed then to come back in. Right.
So they're like, and maybe they did that multiple times, like, well, we'll just make this one person happy and then, she'll be the only one there. It's really hard to believe.
Yeah. And
I myself couldn't believe it took 9 years.
Yeah. And Brewster has followed up on Marian living from down the road from the Harriet Beecher Stowe house, saying that it was because she wasn't allowed to live in the UC dorms, but now UC has named a dorm after her.
That's truly amazing. Yeah, because I think it was like 1920 when they were at UC, so pretty early days.
And there is apparently a petition to save Sunlite Pool with over 23,000 signatures.
Thank you. I'm glad someone mentioned that. I was remiss. It's on change.org. It's hard to know, what will happen from that or what is happening with the land over there right now.
And is it true that the current carousel at Kings Island was from Coney Island?
Yes, they did move the carousel there. Which is old, that's the same carousel that lost its horses down the river.
Wow. Yeah, as I was looking at the pictures, there were so many similarities to Kings Island.
I know. I had no idea the two were related at all.
Mm-hmm. Brewster's also got another comment on here, Heather. I don't know if you saw about Bill Clinton. Did you see that one? It says, in 1988, Ohio hosted the annual summer meeting of the National Governors Association. We had Dick Clark and his Rock and Roll Review perform in Moonlight Gardens. Bill Clinton, then a governor, was one of the last people on the dance floor tearing it up to Paul Revere and Raiders with all the young staffers.
That's amazing.
I think that's great.
He also said that Don Spencer went to Walnut Hills High School and he was only allowed to swim on Friday afternoons, after which the pool was drained and refilled for the following week. And so he was very sensitive to restrictions placed on the ability of African Americans to swim in public facilities.
Wow.
It's very insulting to think about that. And Spencer, the academy in Walnut Hills that was, I think, built as a sister school to Walnut Hills, is named after Marian Spencer.
And someone is wondering what other famous performers had performed at Moonlight Garden.
Oh gosh, it's a very long list. I don't know if I'm even going to be able to speak to it very well, other than the names that I shared. But I can find more and we can put them out, because it's a pretty unbelievable list.
Yeah.
It was definitely one of the premier locations in the country.
It's so great to see people saying they had their first jobs there. I mean, so many different experiences that people have had and different rides they've rode. A lot of history.
So what do people think about the closure? And, there's a lot of people out there saying, hey, nobody goes to Coney anymore anyway, who cares? I can understand that, but also that's why I feel they can do what they are going to do, but then maybe also try to save, the historic artifacts that are there.
Yeah, we definitely have a lot of people saying, keep the pool, keep the pool. And it's a shame it's being shut down.
Yeah, people are saying that it was their second home.
And it looks like someone's already, or Brewster again, has said that he's proposed to the new owners that they create a Marian Spencer Freedom Trail on the Coney grounds that would include signage that shares info about the history of the civil rights movement in Cincinnati, including the segregation of Sunlite. Cool.
That'd be amazing. Keep the, part of what I like to do is just, connect the dots and just remind people what used to be here, because in 10 years, if somebody goes over there and there's no remnants left, they might not even know about Coney Island.
And Ruth Kennedy asked, how could we take Blacks on school trips to Coney? So I guess they didn't go on school field trips there, maybe.
Well, and if it was after 95, they could have gone to the park. That's a really good question.
I feel like I did see on one of our Facebook posts that we posted that somebody said that their class didn't go just because of that one year.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't go to the park. And it looks like there was a lot of issues with the steamboats and a lot of bad things happening with the steamboats. Like you mentioned,
the ice.
Ice and the fires.
I need to write about the ice gorge of 1917 now, because I'd never even, the flood gets all the attention.
Yeah, fires and explosions too. Yeah.
You can see they tried to prevent it, but Mother Nature still had her way.
Let's see. Heather, are you seeing any more questions here? I'm going through lots of people loving the pool and great teen dances. Somebody saw James Brown there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Was asking to clarify if it was just the Wildcat and Shooting Star that was included in the land that went to Riverbend.
So my best guess, because Riverbend really backs right up there, against the river, that I think that the whole lawn portion must have been where the mall was. Which was, arguably the most important part of the park.
It looks like Catholic Schools Day was a big treat in the 60s.
So yeah, and they had, I sort of touched on it, but didn't have time to go back. But you guys might know about the same thing they do at Kings Island now, P&G Day, or, Kroger Day. I mean, one of the biggest ways that Coney made money was to have groups coming there for their annual company picnics. So you can imagine a lot of that business went to Kings Island, but they used to have Ludlow Day, where kids from Ludlow would go, and then they had Covington Day. They had all sorts of themed days that were really cool. And obviously they were constantly coming up with ways to draw people to the park.
Yeah. So
I'm interested in this one. Somebody asked, did you find anything about the Land of Oz? Because what exactly was the Land of Oz?
It was, well, it was after the book was written. There was a yellow brick road. And I like to imagine it as like a Smurf land that they had at Kings Island, but you're walking down the yellow brick road through like a forest. But I don't know exactly for sure. I didn't fully flesh that out.
And I do want to bring up the
You
Brewster.
can see there's like 100 stories I could have done.
Yeah. I did see that Brewster did bring up an interesting fact, though, that half of the Coney property was in the city of Cincinnati. The other half's in Anderson Township. So the pool was in Anderson Township. So that probably played a role in how long it took for part of the park to become open to all.
Yes. Yeah, that makes a really good point because it essentially separated the two.
I see.
I'm loving all these stories. Thank you all so much.
And Carol Winter said that there were big Labor Day picnics at Coney Island with the labor unions, and that she had saw Bill Clinton at one of those picnics.
I'm writing down this Bill Clinton thing. I gotta look more into that. Just like I heard that, JFK was here in 1960 during his president, not at Coney Island, but like just in Cincinnati. And so then I'm gonna find out like, well, where was he? Same thing with Bill Clinton.
Yeah, someone said their mom and dad took the Island Queen to hear all the big bands when they were dating in the mid to late 49s. Late 40s.
That was the life.
I don't know. Did we read this? Larry Smith, the puppeteer, was a season ticket holder. He would come in the afternoon after filming his children's show, Hattie the Witch and Snarfy our dog. And then Lake Como had freeway with miniature cars you could drive.
That looks so cool.
I saw in one of the pictures it looked like a pedal bike, I guess, kind of as a boat.
Yeah, they had the pedal boats.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I should tell you all some of the resources that I used. There's a really great website made by Don Prout called Coney Island Central, and they have tons of old pictures and facts about Coney. There's a website called Cincinnati Views that I used, and also, of course, the Kenton Library has Faces and Places, which you can search by keyword for Coney, Sunlight. You could look for the rides, and the Cincinnati Library. They have hundreds upon hundreds of old photos, which is why you can see it's almost hard to narrow it down. But yeah, we have a lot of really great, really great resources. So hopefully, we can keep the history alive if we can't save the rest.
Martha said the car ride was called the Turnpike. And they still have pedal boats. Yeah, I saw that they did still have pedal boats this year. I saw that they had the Swans and
Yep, those stayed.
Yeah. The photos you showed, they looked a little different though. But yes.
Well, imagine in the early days they had to fit those big dresses.
And somebody asked about sharing that site again. What was the name of that site? Because I'll go ahead and I'll type it in the chat for everybody too.
Oh, it's well, and you've got to make sure to it's HTTPS, or I'm sorry, no S, http://ConeyIslandCentral.com.
And someone had previously asked what other famous celebrities had visited Coney besides presidents.
That is a good question that I didn't fully go into. Besides Walt Disney?
Yeah.
I have lots of ideas for follow-up posts now.
Okay, and somebody said, what was it? I lost it now. There was the Wild Mouse ride. And I remember hearing about the Wild Mouse. I thought it was called something else though, actually.
Oh, I don't know if I heard of that one.
I
think there still was a metal slide at Sunlight Pool that was built in like back in the 1920s.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know if that sounded painful going down a metal slide, but
we used to have a lot of those in DeVue Park as well.
Right?
Someone it says it was Wild Mouse. Wild Mouse was crazy, like a tiny metal roller coaster. And somebody asked, what additional rides from Coney were moved to Kings Island? Do you know any of that?
I do not offhand. I know they moved the carousel, like we said.
Mhm.
They actually did not move as many as you would think.
I think the racers from Coney Island.
The racer?
Yeah. And a few of the games in that area, I think.
Who remembers the backwards racer?
I do. Don't be that old for that. Somebody also said George Clooney would visit, I guess, Coney Island.
Oh yes, because his grandmother, I believe, was Rosemary Clooney, and she definitely performed at Moonlight Gardens.
And somebody said they think the tumble bug was moved to Kings Island. Somebody said Lost River was a good one too. Smooching in the dark. Carol.
That's like the precursor to the log ride, where you could kind of go out into the woods.
Yes. And somebody also said that I guess they're planning some protest at Washington Park in front of Music Hall on Saturday, February 10th.
Ooh.
Yeah, Rosemary, I was going to say, I thought that was correct, Brewster. Rosemary Clooney was his aunt, was George Clooney's aunt, not grandmother.
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
And the log,
brother,
I guess,
sister of Nick.
yes. The garden.
I would love to get in touch with somebody at Mimi or whomever could like I don't know how much of the plan is out there, but I would love to, you know, speaking of the protest, I just wish we could know more about the plan.
Mm-hmm. Did Coney have a haunted house? That's what someone's asking.
I did not. There was a ride called the Spook that I did come across that looked pretty cool. Haunted house. There definitely would have been room for a haunted house out there.
And somebody commented on Facebook, though, Heather, that the racer was new to Kings Island. It was not moved from Coney. It does look very similar, though. I feel like maybe, could it be the Beastie, maybe? At Kings Island? I don't know what it's called now.
No, I think the Beast is from Kings Island.
No, the Beast, I know, but the Beastie, the little one. It was
yeah, because that wasn't made of wood, I don't think.
Yeah, I don't know.
That one didn't break your back like the Beast.
Saturday, okay, all day at Salem Gardens. They're having a Coney's for Coney fundraiser. All right, we've got a lot of good feedback. It was a very good presentation. A lot of people have a lot of love for Coney. So thank you so much, Heather, for sharing such wonderful pictures and interesting information with us. It's about 7:18, so I'm going to go ahead and start to wrap up because we've got some important things coming up. If you want to go ahead and stop sharing your screen, and we'll let the other Heather share her screen.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Mary Jane.
You're very welcome. And let's see. I just want to remind everyone that the museum is still temporarily closed for minor repairs and renovations, but we still do have outreach programs available during this time and volunteer opportunities. We're always looking for volunteers. We're actually hiring right now as well for the front desk. So if anyone's interested, please contact info@bcmuseum.org. So we reopened February 27th. I also want to remind people that Nature Play at BCM is still open. So we've had some warmer weather lately. I know a lot of people have been asking. So yes, the park is still open. You're welcome to go and play in the park. Okay, and so our next exhibit with the 150th Annual Kentucky Derby on the way, we have an exciting new exhibit. It's going to be opening on March 26th, titled Race to Fame, Hometown Kentucky Derby Legends. This exhibit's going to showcase all of the notable Northern Kentuckians in the Kentucky Derby, such as Steve Cawthon, Eddie Arcaro. So please stay tuned for more information coming soon about that. Summer camp is just around the corner, so be sure to save the date for BCM's 2 upcoming summer camps. Mini Explorer B Camp for ages 4 through 6, June 11th, 12th, and 13th, and Under the Sea Adventure Camp for children entering 2nd through 5th grade. That's June 25th, 26th, 27th, and 28th. Learn more and secure your spot now at bcmuseum.org. You can find out a lot more information about those camps on our website there too. So our friends at NKU Scripps Howard Center for Civic Engagement have an upcoming 6 at 6 lecture called Mind Over Matter, Brain Controlled Systems. And that is Wednesday, March 13th at 6 p.m. This is all about a project that aims to create a bionic arm for individuals with limb amputations. This lecture is going to be held both in person at St. Elizabeth Healthcare Training Center in Erlanger and virtually with Zoom. You can register for those at www.6at6.nku.edu. Our next Northern Kentucky History Hour is going to be on February 20th. It's called A Tradition Reborn from Old Latonia Racetrack to Turfway Park Racing and Gaming with Bob Webster. So that will be on March 5th. We also have Northern Kentucky Movie Theaters with Don Weber. Oh, actually, that's on March 5th. The other one's on February 20th. My bad. Sorry. So please be sure to tune in for both of those. For more Northern Kentucky history throughout the week, check out our Facebook page and our YouTube channel, where you can find the latest Curators Chat, along with all of our past Northern Kentucky History Hour presentations. Please like and subscribe. That's all we're going to have time for this evening. So thank you again to all the sponsors and the supporters of BCM. Until next time, take care, everyone, and good night.
Bye.
Thank you, Heathers.
Thank you all. Thanks for coming.